Do you tend to be a kind person that's always serving others? Have you experienced a religiously destructive relationship or an emotionally destructive relationship? Hi, I'm Tara. I've been there too. And this podcast is all about us living brighter and ever growing 1% at a time. What are some signs that show up when we're not loving ourselves? Let's chat. So I've talked a lot about self-love and how self-love is not an arrogance or we're better than anyone, but a self-love actually allows us to show up more as ourselves in the world and be more blessing to others. So let's talk about signs that we're not loving ourselves. I would say I'm going to talk about 4 ways or 4 signs that we're not loving ourselves, and obviously we always talk about how we can help that 1% at a time. So the first one is being critical in our self-talk to ourselves and constantly doing that. And just so you know, we all have an inner mean girl. We also have an inner 2-year-old. We also have all sorts of things that are naturally in our minds. The challenge is we all identify with that criticism and think that it's our own thoughts and then perpetuate it. So remember, we do have the lifeguard in our brains, and that's constantly keeping us safe. And unfortunately, some of the ways it does that is really strange. And for some reason, the lifeguard thinks that criticism is fabulous because it keeps us small and that keeps us safe. But it's not who we are unless we identify with that. But we can be very critical of ourselves, and we can also be very critical of others and compare to others. And when we do that inside or, in our thoughts and around, that's showing that we're not really loving ourselves. Because when we love ourselves, we don't need to compare to anyone else because everyone is on their own journey. And we don't need to be critical of others because we're respecting their journey. The second one is unkindness. And this can show up lots of different ways. It could be not being nice to our bodies and our minds. It could be buffering, doing things that actually in the end harm us, but we're using it to soothe because we're not wanting to deal with some emotions or what's really going on. And that can show up lots of different ways. I mean, I think a lot of us will associate that with addictions and drugs and alcohol, but it could be simply Netflix. It could be, eating a lot or not eating a lot. I mean, for me, I'll tell you, sometimes those carbs can be a great way to buffer, but buffering could be over-exercising. It's really anything that's really keeping us from feeling our feelings and really looking at reality and doing the work on ourselves. It could be video games. It could be always, for me, I would say my buffering go-tos, and I have to watch out for this, is being busy. We've talked about that. I'll just be too busy and then I won't be doing that inner work of working on that love and cleaning up the kitchen in my house. And also another one is I love to learn, but I could use that as an avoidance of avoiding real things. So buffering is another way we can show that we're being unkind to ourselves, which is a sign of lack of love. Also, another unkind thing we can do ourselves is the people we surround us with. If we're constantly surrounding ourselves with people that are not nice to us or critical, and we're putting ourselves in situations that are really not healthy regularly, that is a red flag that we're not loving ourselves. I thought it was interesting. I was talking to my daughter I guess it was a couple of days ago, and she's 18, and she was talking about how her friend group, there was a season and her friend group was actually very mean to her in a lot of different ways. And she, on her own, chose to be like, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And she really quit hanging out with them because she's like, they weren't really nice to me. And that's just a good way that shows that we're loving ourselves, is we're surrounding ourselves with people that are nice to us. So another way we can be unkind to ourselves is not valuing our thoughts and desires. And that's another red flag that we are not really self-loving as much as we could have. So the first one, again, was being critical. The second one is unkind. Third red flag that we are lacking self-love, or could work on that, because, it's a process, so we can always work on that, is chronic lack of peace. And boy, could I relate to this in the sense that I didn't even like to hang out with myself. To be quiet and still with myself was super uncomfortable. And really, to do a lot of this work, you almost have to create a stillness and do the work. And that's kind of what the Unravel notebook that is available on Amazon that I wrote. It's really about us doing the work, but that could only be done in stillness. And it's really uncomfortable if we haven't grown that love for ourselves. And it's a learnable process. So other things that can really erode our lack of peace that's related to lack of self-love is when we're past focus and focused on negative stories. That's just unprocessed stories or things that are still, how we've processed them isn't serving us, and we're constantly watching replays of things that are harming us. And that's not nice for us to do to ourselves. And also just chronically being filled with a low emotional vibe. And that, what I mean by that is we're all going to have sadness, heartache. We're all going to have all of that. But if we're chronically in a low vibe state where we're, playing, more the victim or not really working through whatever it is, then that shows that we're not loving ourselves as much as we could. I think having that just kind of a resentful life, that again shows that we have unprocessed hurt and pain, and that is again not loving ourselves. For me, my life was the kind girl, doing the right things, being a Christian, marrying a Christian guy, and really the relationship was very destructive to me, and I ended up in the psych ward twice and got labeled bipolar at the time, and it was just a very challenging, awful situation. And so we weren't going to, there wasn't mutuality in working things out. And so I chose a divorce. And then I just questioned myself. I questioned all the whys and questioned my beliefs that got me there, and all of my people pleasing and my serving, and really had to rediscover myself and healthy relationship with God and myself and others. And it was a process. So I created the Unravel notebook, and that was the process that helped me go from that situation to living a life abundantly as a realtor and a life coach, and really thriving in a beautiful marriage. And that's what I want to help others do as well, and create their life by intention to live brighter one day at a time. Future worry, future tripping. This is another, can create a chronic lack of peace. And this is one that, it's a growing process. And I'm great at this in a bad way. So I have to constantly monitor my brain, who thinks it's going to help me out if it future trips, and thinks about worst case scenarios all the time. And there is a place and a time for okay, what's the worst that can happen here? But my brain, being creative, tends to make these stories of how it could turn out in all the different awful ways. And I have to recognize that if I indulge in that, that's not loving myself. I really like this quote that says, a foolish man dies over and over and over, and a wise man only dies once. And I'm trying to remember who said that. But the point is we can worry, and we can be thinking about things, and it happens over and over and over and over. And it usually never happens the way we're even worrying about it. But a wise person just deals with things as they come, and is not future tripping all the time in a bad way. So that's future tripping, I have to watch for myself especially, is a good sign of that, that can create lack of self-love. Looking for external validation falls in the chronic lack of peace. Because if we're chronically looking for external validation, then it's, we'll get it some, we won't get it some. And really with self-love, it's an internal validation, and it's the work that we can only do on ourselves. So external validation, people pleasing, which you all know that I'm a recovering people pleaser, and I still struggle with that. The other day I had to let a tenant know that their rent was increasing. And the tenant was a friend of mine, and I love her dearly. And I burst out in tears. And it just showed me I love to be a caring person, and I still struggle with people pleasing a little too much. I also learned that I'm probably not the best property manager, and I should probably stick with real estate. So learning about myself. So we've talked about criticalness, being unkind to ourselves, chronically lack of peace, and the last one we're talking about is stuckness. And even gosh, I have to really watch my words. If I feel stuck, it's usually a mind problem, and there's and it's a process of me not growing and not loving myself. Stuckness happens when we're not growing, we're avoiding pain, which really being able to process our pain in a way that is we barf it out, we work it out, we sort it out, is a really loving practice to do ourselves. Stuckness is a very low vibe feeling and can really just suck the life out of us. A stuckness also avoids conflict. And, conflict, I don't think any of us are like, yay, conflict. And avoiding it will keep us even more stuck and is really a lack of self-love. Perfectionism is also a stuckness, and that is a lack of self-love. It's like controlling the external environment because we can't control what's inside. I would put goodism in that category, and I am a recovering goodist where I'm always trying to do the good and the right thing and da-da-da-da. And that is actually a stuckness too, because it really limits our growth. And that's something I watch out for in my own life. A stuckness is also when we're honest with ourselves and not accepting reality. And this is a big one. Like, we can't grow unless we take an inventory of really where we're at. And I have to be honest. Sometimes I don't like to be honest with myself and accept reality. But that's where any growth or change starts. And that starts with like, yeah, I don't like that. And what do I need to do about this, or how do I need to look at this? And so that's a really good one as far as like, hey, that's a flag about lack of self-love. So now we're going to talk about, well, how do we grow in self-love? And you can listen to the self-love series we just did, and you can do the Unravel Notebook that helps. But self-love isn't just about accepting where we're at. I mean, we do need to accept where we're at and give ourselves love, but it's about enjoying the present and living for our future selves. It's about knowing that God loves us so much and that we are more than enough. It's an inside job that only we can do. We can get everyone else's praise. We can have the good looks. We can have the money. But it's an inside job. And we as adults can learn to give ourselves that love. We can do that. It takes intentionality and work, but we are able to do that. And the biggest part is like looking at our self-talk like giving some work to that one thought at a time. So I would say 4 ways to grow in our self-love, other than, Unravel Notebook, things that I talk about, is first one is accept, ownership. And I would say like just accepting where we're at and owning that we're here because of the choices and decisions that we've made, and some things happen to us, but we just own where we're at right now. And that is the start of a lot of our self-love, is just being honest with ourselves and owning it. And the second one is really curiosity and kindness with ourselves. And just being, rather than being like judging our own negative thoughts, which is I find myself doing, is like, gosh, you shouldn't be like that, or shouldn't think that, or whatever. Just being curious and kind, like, well, why are you jealous right now? And why does that bother you? And having that kindness with ourselves. The third thing is creating a world. Like, we've owned it, we're curious, we're working through things, and we're creating a world. We're doing the work on ourselves, we're intentionally growing, and we're creating a world that has room for us. It has rooms for our thoughts, our feelings, for who we are, our expressions, because we're all uniquely and wonderfully made, and really creating room and space for that, and then contributing to the world and how we're uniquely designed. Self-love also focuses more on the present, and it's more of a present in the experiencing and more of a future focus. But it's not future tripping. It's like our future identity. It's like, my person in 5 years can do hard things, or my person in 5 years is more in shape and has more muscle mass, or it's living from a future that we've decided that we want. That is the most loving thing we can do for ourselves, because that's when we intentionally try to achieve that future. And so it's really living in the present, but having that future focus, loving ourselves enough to be like, this is where we're at, and yet this is where we intentionally want to be, and willing to do the work to get there. And the work, again, that could be doing the Unravel Notebook, available on Amazon. That could be meeting with a counselor. It could be meeting with a life coach and hypnotherapist, and that's what I do. And it could be listening to different podcasts and books. There's lots of ways, but I would say carve out time, work on loving yourself 1% at a time. We're all in this together, but when we love ourselves and create more space for our vibrancy in the world, we're just a better blessing. We're more authentic with ourselves. We have the peace, and it's a beautiful thing. So that we've talked about our lack of self-love and signs and how we can create it more. I believe in you. We're all growing 1% at a time, so make it a great day.